we're back here at Orlando Code Camp 2013. I'm Brian Hall, and with me I have Rob Windsor. And Rob, today you were here talking about SharePoint apps.
Yeah, it's the new app model.
Okay.
They introduced. It's actually not just for SharePoint. It's SharePoint in Office.
Right.
Right, but the idea, I mean, it's like apps, right? So the same concept of you get an app for your phone or you get an app for your tablet. You get an app for SharePoint or Office.
Okay.
So there's an app store. There's a Microsoft run app store that's on the internet that you can get apps from, and they're vetted by Microsoft in the exact same way that like Windows 8 or phone apps are vetted.
Okay.
And then you can have a private app store within your SharePoint environment, within your SharePoint farm, where the stuff that you build goes, and that's internal to your organization.
Okay.
But the rest of the concept is the same. You go to the store, you pick what you want, you add it into SharePoint or Office, and then you start using it.
And these are front-end JavaScript-based apps, correct?
They don't necessarily have to be JavaScript.
Okay.
So there's a couple different kinds of apps. Let's talk specifically for SharePoint.
Okay.
There's a couple different kinds of apps. There's apps that sort of live in SharePoint. They're called SharePoint hosted apps.
Right.
They will be built using SharePoint technology, the same technology you'd use like in 2010 or previous versions. And then there's what's called provider or cloud hosted apps, which are basically something that's running completely outside of SharePoint.
Okay.
It's just a site on your network or in the internet that really the app becomes just sort of a glorified link where you say, okay, I want to navigate over here, and then in the site that's hosting the app, you basically just add a little bit of JavaScript and CSS to create a small ribbon at the top, which gives you a little bit of information about the context of where you're coming from and a navigation back to the SharePoint site.
Okay. Yeah, and that was, if I remember correctly, and this is, forgive me for my ignorance, but that was where you would need like a security certificate to share between them, or like so that your SharePoint instance trusted this third party.
So it depends again.
Okay.
It always depends, right?
Yeah, exactly. Classic developer answer.
So will your will the app need to talk back to SharePoint?
Okay.
Right. So if the app needs to talk back to SharePoint, yes, it absolutely needs a security context.
Okay.
So in that context token, depending on if you're in Office 365 or SharePoint Online, that token will automatically get passed to your app.
Okay.
If you're on premise or on premises, then you need to set up some certificates to get the security being passed across.
Yeah, because on the cloud version, it's the apps are up there anyway. They're all hosted, so it's all.
But you can have an app that doesn't talk back to SharePoint at all,
right?
And it doesn't really need a security context because it's not doing anything to talk to SharePoint.
So
right?
it's just like a straight web service almost.
It's basically like exactly, software as a service.
Okay.
So I have I don't know, like a stock app or a weather app, right? I don't necessarily need to talk back to SharePoint to be able to do that. So
yeah. So your SharePoint widget would be talking to that that app and rendering on with the JavaScript that you're going to provide as part of the app.
Well, there's two different ways you can. So there's what we call the full page immersive experience.
Okay.
So you click on the link to the app within SharePoint, and you just go to that site.
Okay.
Right. So the URL changes. You're in that site effectively. And again, the only thing that's different about that is that little ribbon at the top. Now, it would be nice if that site kind of had the same sort of UI metaphors that SharePoint has, but most likely, if it's an internet hosted site, it won't.
Right.
Right. And then the other option is what they call an app part. So it's very much like a web part where the app is hosted within an iframe within your SharePoint page.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. So that experience then is more like what you originally described.
Okay. And my understanding is you can do this with Office as well. And I actually saw a demo recently that Scott Hansman did. I think it was Scott. Actually, no, it was John Galloway. Okay. He did something where he wrote a little HTML page with some JavaScript, created an Excel plugin, and then he spins up Excel, and he's got this little sidebar that's doing computations based on what's in his Excel page.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's all with just a web plugin essentially, in a native app called for Excel.
So with the Office tools, you basically have three different options. You can create, I think they call it a task pane. I don't do Office development, but it's the stuff that goes down the side, right? Or a content where it's sort of like in the middle. So like maybe you have some, well, the classic example would be you have some geographic information you want to bring up a map, right? So that would be in the middle of your Excel or your Word document. And the last one, the one I find actually the most interesting, goes in with Outlook. So what you can do is tie in to Outlook, and particularly, let's say, for example, you send me a message, right? And it talks about where we're going to meet for this interview, right? Well, what my app can do is it's sitting at the bottom of the email message. It all of a sudden brings up information about, like the college here and the floor plan and that kind of stuff. So you can parse out information out of the actual message itself and then provide extra added value at the bottom.
Okay.
And there's some interesting things about parsing out like city names and stuff like that. Now, again, I don't do a ton of stuff on the Office side, but what I have seen of the Office email add-ins, it looks really, really interesting.
Yeah, no, that does. And I mean, I was kind of blown away when I saw John Galloway's demo, and now you just mentioned about the Outlook stuff. That's even, because God knows we need to organize the stuff in our Outlook, that's for sure. So,
yeah.
But with SharePoint, so you have another session for just about the JavaScript and jQuery for SharePoint developers.
Right.
Can you speak about that?
Yeah, so that kind of ties in. I mean, I think it would apply even if we didn't have the app model, but the app model makes this more important because part of the thing about building apps is that you can't use the traditional, what we call server object model in SharePoint, where that's really the most rich API we have for building SharePoint applications. All of the code for an app has to run either on the client, which is JavaScript and jQuery, or other JavaScript libraries, or completely outside, right? So that could be any web technology whatsoever. It doesn't really matter, it's just a website, right? Mm-hmm. Because of that, I think there's been more and more focus on doing client-side development, but really, there's been more and more focus on client-side development in the web world anyway, right?
Right,
so,
exactly.
So I think that a lot of SharePoint developers are still really sort of very server-side focused. Like it's all web forms in SharePoint. Right. So they're using server controls, they're using the markup view and that kind of stuff. And it's like, okay, well, it's time to really sort of shift and say, okay, let's take a look at how we can enhance the experience for users by adding in a lot more JavaScript and jQuery.
Right. Exactly. And you said, and when you're talking about JavaScript and on the client side, let me back up. The API, the standard API that you have for SharePoint on the server, is that API now is there more exposure for JavaScript to consume on the client, or has that always been the case? Okay,
so traditionally, if you wanted to build remote applications for SharePoint, mm-hmm. there was a set of SOAP-based web services, ASMX web services. In SharePoint 2010, they introduced what they call the client object model, which is really just 3 proxies around a WCF service. There was one for managed code, there was one for Silverlight, and one for JavaScript.
Okay.
They also introduced a set of REST APIs. Now in 2010, those REST APIs were really just CRUD operations around lists, so list data.
Right.
Because again of the app model, they have greatly enhanced the APIs for what the JavaScript, or all 3 client object models, but in our case specifically we're talking about the JavaScript one, as well as the REST API.
Yeah.
And the REST API now is more of a full API as opposed to just CRUD operations, where you can do a lot of the same things using REST as you could with what we call the CSON, the client-side object model.
It's just much more robust at this point. It's more traditionally RESTful instead of just CRUD.
Yeah, exactly. So now if you're doing client-side code, you have the choice of using either the REST generally with jQuery, or you can go with the client-side object model.
Okay.
And the one big advantage client-side object model has over REST is that you can batch up requests for resources or commands to do different operations, mm-hmm. And then execute them all in one big batch on the server.
Yeah. So you're saying send one AJAX call up just to batch.
Yeah. So I'm going to say I need this piece of information. I need this piece of information. I need to modify this thing. I need to do this. Now go do all of that stuff in one thing.
Nice.
Yeah.
So instead of having multiple requests.
Yeah, it becomes a lot less chatty.
Yeah. Nice. Wow.
Yeah, so it's a combination of, okay, what are the APIs, how we use them, at least my talk is, and also, what are some best practices around, where do we put jQuery and other libraries, where do we put our own custom libraries, how do we reference them in our pages, how do we make effective use of them, like getting stuff out of the global namespace and that kind of stuff. Some very standard JavaScript best practices.
Best patterns and practices, if you will, so that you don't get an organic, massive growth of JavaScript that gets out of control.
Exactly.
So very nice. Yeah, SharePoint has the new release from what I've seen is really impressive with the app model. When I read about that, I was very Right.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. I think one of the issues that people are going to face is that, while Microsoft has made a big investment in extending the remote APIs, the CSOM and the REST APIs, there's still a lot of holes in them. And people are going to face a lot of places where they just hit a roadblock and it's like, okay, well, how do I have to work around that and so on. I think that in the SharePoint Online space, the app model is the best way to go in terms of building extensions.
Right.
And if you're building a product and you want to get it out there, of course the App Store is great, right?
Yeah.
But I still think, at least in the 2013 timeframe, that some people will have to stick with the existing, what we call a farm solution model, right. Just because of the robustness of the server object model versus what the remote APIs offer. Right. Now, of course, over time, Microsoft's going to fill those holes, add in, and stuff like that. So hopefully they'll become, as time goes on, the parity between the remote APIs and the server API will become greater.
Right. So that's okay. So and the reason being the cloud, the online solutions, the hosted SharePoint Online. That's the reason you can't build as robust is because you don't have access to a lot of the core APIs.
Yeah. So basically the way the traditional extensions work with SharePoint is you build it's called a farm solution, and that has a DLL which normally goes in the GAC, and it has a bunch of files that get pushed up onto the SharePoint server.
Right.
Well, because you have a multi-tenant hosting, Microsoft's like, no, we're not going to allow you to do that, right? So there was sort of, in 2010, there was sort of an in-between thing called a sandbox solution where it was a limited set of the APIs and you could put files but not in certain places and so on. The app model really sort of replaces what we call sandbox solutions.
And it's obviously the way forward, especially as rich clients become more ubiquitous and with JavaScript and jQuery and all that for the web. So absolutely, that's great. So how can people get a hold of you, give you money?
Well, I mean, in person, I take large bills.
Yeah. Franklin program is great, so.
Yeah. So my Twitter handle is @Rob Windsor.
Okay.
My blog msmvps.com/blog/Windsor. I think if you just Google or Bing Rob Windsor blog, you'll get to me.
Okay.
And I also, if I do a little plug,
Pluralsight.
I have recorded some content for Pluralsight.
A lot of content.
I've done 5 courses.
Yeah.
I'm not John Papa, who's done about 40, but still I have a decent amount in there. And I'm actually currently working on a course on the client-side object model and REST APIs for 2013. So
great, that's great.
Yes.
So pluralsight.com. And look for the SharePoint libraries. There's a big category for SharePoint there.
Yeah.
So,
and if you don't have a code, you can get a free trial. There's 7. I think there's 7 authors here this week.
Yes.
This weekend. So we all have the free trial codes for a longer trial period if you want.
Absolutely. So we'll put the links down there in the notes for his Twitter handle and the blog, and as well as Pluralsight. So thank you very much for coming out today.
Thank you.
And speaking with us today.
Great.
Thanks.